Greetings, all literary exploration students. This screencast is being created to explain to you basically how the literary exploration class is going to work, because it is quite different from other English classes that we have in eAchieve. So the objectives of this screencast are to help you to understand again how this class is set up, understand how to find assessments in the class, understand how to create a reading path for the class, and also understand how our e-sessions will run, because they will run a little bit differently. Lots of things will be a little bit different about this class than other English classes. So let's start with kind of the philosophy of the class and why it is set up differently. This class was designed to be a Reader's Workshop class. Well, what does Reader's Workshop mean? Let's look at the definition here, and I took this definition from readersworkshop.org. It says the basic philosophy behind a Reader's Workshop is to allow students to spend an extended amount of time reading texts that interest them on a daily basis and to provide opportunities to talk about literature. The ultimate goal of a Reader's Workshop is to develop lifelong, passionate readers. So if you're doing a Reader's Workshop type of a class, then students should be reading different texts. They should be reading different texts based on what they're interested in, what their reading level is, and so the whole class doesn't read one thing together. Everybody's reading something different, and then students come together on a regular basis with the teacher to discuss what they're reading, to discuss the literature. So that's really what this class is going to be, and that's why this class has to be set up a bit differently, because we are only during a few weeks of the semester are we all actually doing the same thing. During the rest of the weeks of the semester, during the majority of the semester, students are going to be reading their own individual books that they've chosen, and they're going to be completing their own individual assessments that they've chosen. So it's definitely going to be different from other classes you've probably experienced. So this is the basic class setup here. So we're going to start the class with Unit 1, and Unit 1 is going to take place from weeks 1 through 4. There is a Unit 1 button in our class where all the information and all the assignments for Unit 1 are located, okay? And during Unit 1, we are actually going to be together as a class. So during weeks 1 through 4, we will all be working on the same assignments. So you're going to be working on, as it says on the screen, same assignments, same readings, and our class e-sessions will be together. So we'll all be together every e-session, and our class e-sessions will be every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. So weeks 1 through 4, the class isn't going to be too confusing. It's going to be set up very similar to the way other classes would be set up. But starting week 5, so weeks 5 through 17, which is the majority of the class, students are going to break off, and we're going to be working individually on our own reading paths. So you'll be reading different books depending on what you've chosen to read, and you'll also be completing different assessments based on the assessments you've chosen to complete for each book that you're reading. So during weeks 5 through 17, class e-sessions will still be every Tuesday at 9:30, but certain weeks the teacher is going to be holding individual conferences with students rather than whole class sessions. We will still have some whole class sessions where we'll all get together to talk about the books that we're reading, but during certain weeks I'm just going to be doing individual sessions, individual conferences, because I need to touch base with students individually to see how it's going and how they're making progress on their reading path, or maybe not making progress on their reading path. Then during week 18, by that point we're done reading our individual books, and all students are completing a final semester reflection journal. So that's the basic setup of the class. Now let's get a little bit more into how specific things are going to work. The first thing you need to understand is that reading path that I was mentioning. So I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint now and actually show you what the reading path looks like. This reading path is in a Google Doc. So if you've never used Google Docs before you can actually type into this reading path and make it your own, you're going to first have to be logged into your school email account, which is a Google account. Then you have to come up here and go to File and go to Make a Copy. All right, click Make a Copy, and that'll make a copy of this reading path in your own Google Drive, so then you can type into it. This reading path basically lays out the rules for the class, okay, and it says them right at the top, right here. It says number 1, during weeks 5 through 7, you must read 3 books. 3 books, okay, between weeks 5 and 7. All books must be school appropriate, so we're not, reading books based on violent video games or explicit romance novels, etc. School appropriate. I've given you 2 suggested reading lists. One is a list of fictional novels. One is a list of nonfiction books. There's lots of books on those lists. I compiled those lists from lots of different sources. There's really good books on those lists. If you'd like to choose a book off those lists, please do so. If you would rather choose your own book, that's fine. Just get teacher approval. Only one book can be a book you've read before, because sometimes we do, understand new things if we read something a second time, but the other 2 books should be new to you. You want to read a mixture of fiction and nonfiction. So you could read 1 fictional novel and 2 nonfiction books, or you could read 2 fictional novels and 1 nonfiction book. It doesn't really matter as long as there's a mix of both. With each book that you read, you need to earn a grade for each of our 3 class learning targets. So you need to earn a T1, T2, and T3 grade. Exactly how you earn those grades is going to depend, because you get to choose which assessments you want to complete. As long as you're earning a T1, T2, and T3 grade for each book you read, then you're good to go. And I've given you lots of options for assessments. There's lists of assessment options linked into the class as well, which we'll talk about later. And the last rule is that you want to schedule some individual conferences with the teacher, as I was just talking about before, okay? These individual conferences are not mandatory, but they're highly recommended so that we can just talk and touch base, and I can make sure that you are, doing what you need to do and that you're on good pace to be able to finish the class by week 18. So from there on down, there's basically just some spaces here for you to kind of organize yourself. So there's a place for you to type in when your first conference with the teacher is going to be, the date and the time, which book you're choosing to read first, okay? Which assessments, T1, T2, T3 assessments are you going to complete for that book? And it kind of says right here, to keep you organized, you should read the first book between weeks 5 and 8. So that's September 29th through October 24th. Then here's book 2. Okay, again, when is your conference going to be for this book? You should read book 2 between weeks 9 and 12. That's October 27th to November 25th. So right before Thanksgiving, you'd be finishing book 2. Which book are you going to read? Which assessments are you going to complete for that book? And then the third book. Okay, when are you going to have a conference about that book? And you're going to read book 3, basically weeks 13 through 17. So that's December 5th through January 16th. Which book are you going to read? They can put the title down here, and then below it, which assessments are you going to complete for that book. So the reading path is something that you need to fill out yourself, but each time you conference with your teacher, the teacher's going to obviously come in and check your reading path, talk to you about the reading path. Maybe you guys can revise the reading path together if it's not working out for you. The teacher can help you get ideas to just focus yourself as you complete work throughout the course of the semester. But the reading path is one of the first things, basically weeks 1 through 4, we're working on Unit 1 together, just kind of getting introduced to reading and different styles of reading. But then once we hit week 5, this reading path needs to start to be filled out. Okay? So that's the reading path. Let's come back into our PowerPoint here. We're going to scan down. The next thing I kind of want to get into are the reading lists. As I mentioned just a minute ago, there are reading lists that are linked into the class. There's a reading lists button in the class, and you can check out the reading list there to choose books. Remember, you have to read a mixture of fiction and nonfiction, but you can choose a book that's not on a list as long as the teacher approves it. Okay? The goal is to find some really good books that you've not read and that you really find interesting and you're really excited to read. Because that's kind of the whole point of the whole class, is to get interested in reading and to read some awesome things that you've never read before. There's also going to be a tool provided to you called FollettShelf. Now, this FollettShelf is actually linked under the textbooks button in our class, because we don't really have a textbook in this class. We have FollettShelf instead. And FollettShelf is basically a program that you can log into, and every student has a FollettShelf login already. You can log in, and there will be some ebooks provided for you on FollettShelf through eAchieve. Okay, I'll be honest, there's about 25 books for literary exploration students. And if you might like some of those books, you might not. you'd have to read these books in ebook format, meaning you'd have to read them on your computer. So if you're a student that doesn't like to read on your computer, you might not want to use FollettShelf and read some of the ebooks. But if you don't mind reading on your computer, check out what's in FollettShelf. You might find a book there that you really like that you want to read. So this is going to be one option that we provide to you. If you don't like to read ebooks, you could go get your own books at the library. You could purchase a book, however you want to do it. So remember that for each book that you read, and we're going to read 3 of our own individual books total, for each book that you read, you want to earn a grade for each of our 3 learning targets. So you want to earn a T1, a T2, and a T3 grade. The way that you can do that is going to depend on which assessments you choose. Some assessments just assess one target, just a T1 assessment, or just a T2 assessment, or just a T3 assessment. If you choose to do an assessment that just assesses one target, well, then you're going to have to do multiple assessments for your book. Other assessments assess all 3 targets at once. So you may only do one assessment for each book, depending on what you choose. Some assessments are kind of more bang for your buck, so to speak, because they assess multiple targets. So there are lists of assessment options linked under the assessments button in our class. And there's also, underneath the assessments button, there's also all the links to submit all the assessments for the semester. So you need to, as you're creating your reading path, look at those assessment options, those lists of assessment options, and really think hard about, what book you're reading and what assessment sounds interesting, and, when do you plan on getting that assessment done and completed. And if you want to do an assessment that is not on any of those assessment options lists, you can. If you have a different idea of something to do, that's fine. Just talk to the teacher and get that approved. And last but not least, teacher conferences. Remember that during certain weeks of the class, rather than doing a whole class e-session, we're going to do individual conferences. So the teacher's basically going to set up like a 10 or 15 minute set time to meet with you during that week to discuss what's going on with you in your reading path. And the plan is to hold these conferences during our regular e-session time, which would be Tuesdays between about 9:30 to 11 in the morning. But if a student really can't do a teacher conference during that time, they could request another time. You just have to contact the teacher and say, hey, I can't make it at Tuesday at 9:30. Can I set up a different session time with you? And that's fine. We can meet individually at a different time. We're going to sign up for these teacher conferences using a calendar that's linked under the teacher conferences button in our class. So let's check that out now. So, oops, I'm sorry, I just opened up the wrong thing here. We need to open up our class. Well, there we go. There is a teacher conferences button in our class. It's towards the top. And underneath this button, it really breaks down for you exactly what we're going to do during different weeks. So between weeks 5 and 17, which is when we're working individually on our own things, it tells you exactly what we're doing each week. So during weeks 5 and 6, as you can see here, there's not going to be a whole class e-session. I'm going to do teacher conferences during weeks 5 and 6. Okay, then during weeks 7 and 8, we will have a whole class e-session, and I tell you what the topic of the e-sessions are going to be right here. During weeks 9 and 10, it's going to be teacher conferences again. Weeks 11 and 12, it'll be, again, whole class sessions, and I've given you the topic of what we're going to cover those sessions. Weeks 13 and 14 will be teacher conferences. Weeks 15 and 16 will be whole class sessions. The topics of those sessions are right there. And then week 17 will be our final week of teacher conferences. And I made week 17 teacher conferences just so that at the end of the semester I can kind of check in with students that need me to check in with them. So I've got a calendar here just to sign up for weeks 5 and 6 conferences. Once weeks 5 and 6 conferences are over, I'll put up another calendar to sign up for the weeks 9 and 10 conferences. Okay, so I'll just keep putting the calendars up as the weeks are over. So I know that this class is going to be a little bit different. We covered a lot in this short screencast. Please come to our class e-sessions during weeks 2, 3, and 4 when we're going to be working in Unit 1, and the teacher will obviously be there to answer a lot more questions and explain even more about the class. And remember, our class e-sessions are going to be Tuesdays at 9:30 a.m. If you can't attend those live sessions, then watch the recorded session and contact your teacher with any questions.